The UFL has a Panthers problem. With 3 straight home games to start the season, the Panthers are having a tough time getting fans into Ford Field. The attendance at Ford Field, from 9,400 in the win over St. Louis to open the season, to 7,400 in the loss to Birmingham, to last week's 6,900 in the win over Houston. That's pretty tough. What is the future of the Michigan Panthers in the UFL? And is there a chance that the UFL might pull the plug on the Panthers? Let's bring in Pro Football Newsroom's James Larsen to answer that question. Have you been surprised here, James? You've gone to some of these Ford Field games. Have you been surprised with the low attendance?
Honestly, no. Given what we had last year, I know Mike Mitchell has been talking recently about the attendance and how it's actually slightly up from the averages last year, where a lot of those USFL games last year, I was at all of them at Ford Field, and there were a couple of good games, and then there were a couple where it was just not great. So this year, it's like, yes, the team's back for another season, so you would expect there to be a little bit more hype surrounding that.
Right.
But taking into account all the logistics and all the factors that played into getting to the season of ticket sales that took forever to get going.
Right.
They didn't start selling single game tickets until March 13th. That's 17 days before their home opener. And you have 3 straight home games to start the season for the one team that had the whole ticket debacle even worse than all the others. So yeah, it's unfortunate. To me, it's not much of a surprise just given the circumstances.
That's a good point. I want to ask you, I've never been able to find out a really good answer to this, and you may not have an answer either. Do you have any insight on what the lease agreement is or the agreement with the UFL and the Michigan Panthers in Ford Field?
I do not have the specific details, but I know that it's a pretty penny. There's a reason why it took so long originally before the merger even went down. There was a whole to-do behind the scenes of, would the Panthers play at Ford Field? And then finally the USFL made that announcement in the fall, but it took a while to get there, especially compared to some of the other venues. And I'm told, it was because very pricey. They were going back and forth with different counter offers. Ford Field wanted that a lot, and they got a lot. So, yeah.
That's tough. I went over the numbers, but before we started here, and when you have a pricey lease agreement like that, and then you start seeing the fans, attendance start to dwindle, you have to start to wonder about, what it really is, the future of the Michigan Panthers. And we're going to get into that. How about let's actually talk about football that's happening on the field. Your Michigan Panthers there that you've kind of been close to. They have looked like they're a much better team than I thought. Especially this past weekend with EJ Perry. Finally, they've let him run the ball a little bit more. The defense is definitely there. Honestly, this team could probably move to 3-1 this weekend because San Antonio's quarterback, Chase Garbers, he's out for the season. So, there's an opportunity for this team to do big things, even if the fan interest, at least in person, isn't there.
No, absolutely. I think the Panthers across the board, you look at the improvements that they made, and it's personnel-wise, you have Marcel Belfay in there at the offensive coordinator position now, and I thought that his offense, the way he called the game against Houston, by far the best that we've seen from him so far. Yeah. EJ Perry, decision-making was on point. I thought he had a really good balance between knowing when to use his legs, when to throw the football. We weren't seeing him try to force the ball into windows that just aren't there like we saw the first couple weeks. Across the board, defensively, they've always been great on defense. I want to point out, they have a new defensive coordinator this year in Colin Bauer, who's done a phenomenal job there in Michigan. I think this is a team. Look at Houston, they're a mess. You look at Memphis,
really
my good Case Cookis is going to die before the season ends. Like it's just
hard to watch.
It's disastrous. So Birmingham is the behemoth of the UFL, like I like to call them. But Michigan, if they play like this, if they can keep the consistency going up, if they can catch Birmingham on an off day, they absolutely have a chance to go to the championship. So
that team has really surprised me. I didn't mean to cut you off there. Yeah, that team's really surprised me. Are they doing better than you thought they might?
I honestly thought that they would do well. Just looking at the talent, looking at EJ Perry coming back, Michigan. It was a little hard to evaluate them because we're looking at 9 games of Josh Love, and then we finally got 2 of EJ Perry, and the offensive line play has been better. They struggled. Birmingham's defensive line is by far, like, their defensive line could be an NFL defensive line if we're being honest. That's a whole other story we could go down. But their offensive line has been looking a lot better this year compared to 2023. So I think that's going to really help out this organization a lot.
Yeah, that's where the game is won, right in the trenches there. To the question at hand, James, let's fast forward to 2025 and or 2025. And do you think that we're seeing a Michigan Panthers team? And if so, are they playing at Ford Field? I mean, could you see like if things continue to trend the way they're trending as far as attendance goes?
I think so. I mean, I know the attendance isn't ideal, but there's something about Ford Field, the legitimacy it brings to the league, and also the Michigan Panthers are an organization and a franchise that has so much rich history. It's a franchise that I know the USFL side fought really hard for to keep during this merger. So yes, there's lots of room for improvement, but I would expect them to stick around. I'd even heard rumors dating back to a year and a half ago now of the potential ownership being lined up in Michigan. So who knows where that stands right now? But you'd think that if that is still a potential option, and if the league's goal is to sell these franchises off to owners and ownership, I would see Michigan sticking around.
Yeah, I mean, you would hate to see a franchise fold, especially if 1 year into it. But yeah, I have my questions, and I like your positivity on that. I hope that's right. I think that might be one of the key. I think the key to saving this league was the merger, and I think the key to continuing this league is to start to they've put these franchises now in the cities and to start having ownership happen as well. But I just want to point out you are joining me from Texas because you are based in Michigan, but you made the trip down to Texas to see some games. You went to Arlington, you went to San Antonio. Not great turnout in Arlington. You saw it there, about 8,400 fans. San Antonio, a little better with about almost 12,000 fans. What was kind of the different experience in those different arenas there, those different stadiums?
Yeah, a much different experience. Where in Arlington, you have a baseball field that's turned into a football field at Choctaw, and it was by no means a bad experience. I think it's great for the fans. I love what they're doing there, especially with it being the hub. It is a bit wonky. It's a little bit strange with some of the setup. Some fans in certain sections are just so far away from the field, so that makes it a little bit interesting. And then at the same time, yeah, the attendance wasn't great. The fans that were there, they were really into it. But it's a little interesting to me that a team that won the championship last year. I know they're losing games right now, but they got a decent team, and it's hard. They're having a hard time getting fans there. So I'm hoping Arlington picks up. San Antonio was a lot of fun. That was a blast. They were really loud. I was shocked when the number of fans came out and it was under 12,000 because it was sounded so loud in there. Another aspect of the Alamo Dome that's interesting is the fans are very close to the field, so it feels even louder. Like there was a couple of times I was in the end zone and it's like a third down and St. Louis had the
Right.
ball, and that crowd, they were, my goodness, I thought my eardrums were going to pop out. So it was good stuff. And I'm impressed. It's a shame. Yeah. Would we like to see San Antonio Commander level attendance in San Antonio? Yes, but they're still doing well, all things considered. And again, ticket sales weren't ideal with the whole merger. There was a lot of logistics behind the scenes that you know how it went. It
Right. I mean, they were
hopefully
just
heading into
trying.
year two, things improve.
Agreed. Daryl Johnston has been open about how they just tried to get this, going this year. They just were trying to get everything going. I was surprised, we talk about fan attendance. I was surprised that there were only about 12,000 people in Birmingham. They have really embraced the Stallions. It was, their first home game. Um, I know the Alabama spring game was also that day. When you have 72,000 people show up for a spring game and it was also televised, Alabama's kind of football crazy, but I thought there might be a few more people there. I'll be interested to see at the next home game if that Birmingham Stallions attendance maybe picks up a little bit. What do you think? Especially
Yeah,
being the only undefeated team left.
right. And it's interesting because I was talking to Daryl Johnston a bit in Arlington the other day, and he's like, "What more do the Stallions have to do to get this city behind them? They're
Yeah,
two-time champions. They're undefeated to start the season. They have one of the best spring football rosters we've ever seen. I mean, just
true.
across the board. Yes, they're doing well. They're not doing poorly by any means. 12,000 again with A Day and all that going on. 72,000 fans there. Sure, you can make a little bit of an excuse there, but at the end of the day, there's no reason why Birmingham shouldn't be able to fill both those sides. I mean, I know it's not as big of a market compared to some of the other cities you're in, but it's still a big city. It's a big enough city where you've got a professional football team, a team, Birmingham, they have wanted spring football for so long,
Yeah,
dating back to the AAF when they had the Birmingham Iron. And then they were begging the XFL to come there in 2020. They were trying to get someone else to come, and eventually the USFL showed up with the Stallions, and that's where the whole hub system came from. I don't know. I'm not disappointed. I'm just a little bit like, all right, come on, let's get those numbers up. We got to
Yep.
see 15. We got to see 20 there in Birmingham. I don't know what else the team has to do. Like, there's nothing else the league can really do, in
Right.
my opinion.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. I do think the Alabama spring game had a day, as they call it. I think that had a big dent in there. So again, it'll be interesting to see at the next home game. And we should point out too that the financials are not based on ticket sales, but you don't want to put that product on TV and have nobody. I mean, just to continue to watch Ford Field, look the way it does. But people are watching, and Mike Mitchell released his with Sports Illustrated. You mentioned him. He released the ratings. St. Louis at San Antonio had a little over 1 million viewers on ABC. Houston at Michigan, 974,000 on ABC. Memphis at Birmingham, 837,000 on Fox. DC at Arlington, this was a tough one, 534,000 on ESPN. So kind of mixed news there, James. As the networks continue to get it done, ESPN viewership has fallen a little bit. And I know you write a lot and you follow these ratings.
Yeah, so obviously week 1, we had a couple games that got over 1 million, and then since then we were waiting. When would that happen again?
Right.
I really thought that the game on ABC between St. Louis and Arlington would have an opportunity, but then going up with all the NCAA tournaments and all that, I understand why that game didn't get there. So I think it's a really good step in the right direction. We're seeing a lot of stability. Yeah, the ESPN number was down a little bit from the past couple of weeks, but it's a Saturday. It's like it was at like 12 o'clock Eastern or 1 o'clock Eastern, and I don't know. For looking at ESPN's numbers last year, that's still pretty good. The numbers are still up, and you're looking at the fact that we have so many games on OTA networks like Fox and ABC. Fox is the one that, again, not a bad number. I feel like we should see a little bit more. I really thought Birmingham, Memphis could have pulled more than 837. It felt a little bit reminiscent of what we have with the USFL last year with a couple of those games where it's like, man, these are primetime games, primetime matchups. These markets should be tuning in. So I think that's the next step for the UFL is going to be how do they continue to build and grow upon this? We're seeing consistent numbers. This is not at all like last year where the USFL and XFL had big drop-offs from weeks 1 to 3. The drop-off is very minimal. ESPN's the only one that's actually noticeable. So I think all things considered, we're looking pretty good. And again, to get 1 million on Sunday between St. Louis and San Antonio, a game that was really, really good and down to the wire, you got to think that they'd be pleased with that.
Yeah, and you and I had talked before the season, our expectations, I thought, should be right around there. It had to be better than last year. And I know there's been a little bit of spin as in the third week, they said, oh, well, it's up 8% over the USFL from last year. But in the third week, there was also a game on USA. I think they're really getting a bump, as you and I talked about before the season started, for these games to be on ABC and Fox and ESPN. I think that helps a lot. Now, this is going to be interesting. I know you're going to keep your eye on the ratings this weekend because this is where we have the first 2 regional games at 7 o'clock on Saturday night on Fox and only a single Sunday game that's going to be Arlington at Houston. I think that is going to be on FS1, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm almost willing to – I'm interested to see what this regionalization is going to look like. But that single game on Sunday, I don't know.
I think the ratings are definitely going to dip this week for the reasons that you mentioned, and also I believe there's a game on ABC, but that's going to be like 12:30 Eastern on Saturday morning / noon, which is not the greatest time slot. So I think we're going to see the numbers down a little bit, and it's to be expected. When Fox in prime time, if they're getting 837,000 for Birmingham and Memphis, I'd say both of those games are probably going to get around 400,000, and I think we shouldn't be alarmed by those numbers and honestly, there is a small chance that we actually get decent numbers for both those games because you'd expect fans from all 4 of those markets to be tuning in at the same time now instead of fans from just 2 markets to be tuning in at the same time. Because generally speaking, right, if someone's a Birmingham Stallions fan, the odds are they're not like we're the crazies. We watch all 4 games every weekend. But there's not a lot of people like that. We're in a kind of specific sect where someone from St. Louis, they're probably only going to watch a Battlehawks game. Someone from Memphis, probably only going to watch a Showboats game. So we might actually see, it might be more than 837 split between those 2. We'll see. I just think that's something interesting to point out.
Yeah, you and we talked about it before the season, and I thought at first blush, I was like, this isn't a good idea. But then I kind of subscribe to that. It's like, well, maybe you will get a regional audience. You put that together, and maybe that, it does work out to at least try to hit that number. James Larsen, Pro Football Newsroom. You can follow him at Pro Football Newsroom. All the socials, writes about it all. Writes about the football on the field and off the field, and he talked about a lot of it here. James, always appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, John.